Hello, my name is Colette Gillow, and today we will be discussing Advanced Micro Devices Incorporated, better known as AMD, in a company analysis to determine whether or not the company should be invested in. Here is a brief outline of everything we're going to cover. We're going to begin with AMD as a company, then we're going to talk about them in the news. Third is our analysis, and then finally our decision. AMD was founded May of 1969 by Jerry Sanders. The man on the right was 7 of his colleagues from Fairchild Semiconductor. Their first product was the AM9300, which was released in 1970, becoming their first source of revenue. 1971, they went public on the stock market, and by 1975, AMD had over 212 products. Come 1982, AMD began a 10-year-long contract with Intel to become a second source for Intel chips. However, that contract ended in 1986. In 1994, AMD had a legal battle with Intel over their AM386 processor, which was reverse compatible with Intel's 386 processor. The courts ruled in AMD's favor. In 2005, AMD became a serious competitor in the chip market with the first gigahertz microprocessor. In 2006 to 2017 began AMD's acquisitions and mergers. The most notable one was in 2006 when they acquired ATI Technology for their graphics card. A smaller one took place in 2012 with C Micro, and then there were a few others. In 2014, Dr. Lisa Su joined the company, and 1 year later, she became the CEO. Today, AMD's most notable product lines is their Athlon, Resin, Epic, Radeon, Radeon Pro, and Radeon Instinct lines. AMD is in the semiconductor industry. The industry is comprised of 4 main products, of which AMD sells 2 of them. The first product is their central processing units, which can be found in our picture to the right, which are better known as CPUs, or the brains of the computer. The second product that AMD sells is random access memory, also known as RAM, which determines the speed of the computer. AMD can also be found in the graphics card market with their Radeon graphics cards. And then AMD recognizes 2 main competitors on their 10K form. And the first one is Intel in the semiconductor industry for the microprocessors. And then the second one is NVIDIA in the graphics card market. Now we're going to look at the annual report, which was split up into 3 sections. The first one being the 2018 review. AMD had a 20% annual revenue growth for its second year. They had improved gross margin and improved profitability. And as you can see on the picture to our right, they also had better research and development investment, and their expense per revenue percentage went down. They were also deemed the best performing stock in the S&P 500 that year. Next is the 2019 outlook. Now for 2019, AMD has a lot of stuff going on. They have new products coming out. They have their Radeon 7 graphics, their Navi graphics, the launch of their 2nd gen Resin mobile processor, first ever AMD based Chromebooks, and it's also their 50th year anniversary, which they are celebrating with a limited edition graphics card and motherboard. Finally is how they plan the next 50 years, and in the next 50 years they want to make AMD a high performance computing leader. AMD has 12 people among their top management, including senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents, and the C-suite. However, we're only going to look at 3 of them. The first person we're going to look at is Dr. Lisa Su. She is the president and CEO of AMD since June 2015, but has been in the company since 2014. Before AMD, she was a senior vice president at Freescale Semiconductor and spent 13 years at IBM. She graduated from MIT with a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, and published more than 40 technical articles. The second person we're going to look at is Dr. Sandeep Chennakeshu. He is AMD's Executive Vice President of the company's Computing and Graphics Business Group since January 2019. He has a doctorate in electrical engineering and is an IEEE fellow and holds 170 patents. The final person we're going to look at is AMD's Chief Technology Officer, Mark D. Papermaster, who's been in the company since 2011. Mark Papermaster has been in the industry for over 35 years, has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, and a master's from the University of Vermont, and a part of the IEEE Industry Advisory Board. Now we're going to look at current events and press releases for the company, and while press releases are biased in the company's favor, it is always great to know what's happening with them. So the first one we're going to look at is AMD stock rising because of an Intel security flaw. On March 9th, even though this article was released on March 19th, it came about that a report from researchers at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts and a university in Germany discovered a security flaw within Intel's hardware. This allowed information to be leaked to hackers, and while Intel claims that only partial information could be leaked, investors still didn't like the news. So AMD stock rose 6% by noon that day. The next one we're going to look at is AMD teaming up with Google for their new gaming platform called Google Stadia. And what it is AMD will be providing a custom-made Radeon graphics card for Google's cloud-based gaming system. The last piece of news we're going to look at is AMD's CEO giving a speak at the International Computex Conference for 2019. This will be occurring on May 27th, and a lot of people are excited because they can't wait to hear the news of what's going to be happening this year with the company, as well as maybe getting a glimpse at AMD's Navi graphics card that they're supposed to release. But we'll have to wait and see on May 27th to see what happens. Now we're going to begin our analysis of AMD, beginning with the analyst statements. As you can see from the screenshot on Bloomberg, taken on April 24, 2019, out of 38 analysts, 16 say to buy, 16 say to hold, and 6 say to sell. David Wong from Numera, one of his reasonings for recently upgrading his recommendation from a hold to a buy is because he sees AMD gaining market share in the future and sees the momentum continuing. Morningstar also says that AMD's graphics are sought after for cryptocurrency mining, and that if blockchain technology takes off, AMD will be in a great position. On the flip side, the reason for people saying to sell AMD is because they still see Intel as a top player, that Nvidia is still ahead in the graphics card market, and that AMD lacks the size to sustain any momentum against Intel or Nvidia. Now we're going to get into our competitor analysis, beginning with each company's prices and how much they've grown over the past 5 years. This chart was taken from Yahoo Finance, and as you can see, each company has grown over the past 5 years. AMD by 592%, Nvidia by 941%, and Intel by 122%. Now we're going to look at the PE ratio, bond rating, and beta for AMD, Nvidia, and Intel. We're going to start with the PE ratio, which stands for price per earnings ratio. It helps investors know whether the company is undervalued or overvalued, and usually a high PE ratio means that investors see a lot of potential for this company in the future. It's worth noting that the average market PE ratio for semiconductors is 31.10, and the average one for the entire market is 17. AMD is sitting at 86.2. Nvidia comes in second with 31.6, and Intel is the lowest at 13.1. Now, what this means is that investors are willing to pay that much times earnings for one share of the company. Next, we're going to get into our bond rating, and the bond ratings are from Standards & Poor's. As you can see with this picture to the left, that is how Standards & Poor's rates the bonds for corporate bonds. AMD sits at a B+, which is uncertain for them, meaning that AMD can go either way. Nvidia sits at a triple B+, which is higher than AMD, just by a little bit, and it means that they're adequate. And then Intel has the best rating with A+. Now, finally, we're going to look at the beta, which is how volatile each company is as compared to the market. AMD is the most volatile, sitting at 1.63. NVIDIA is the second most with 1.58, and Intel is the lowest with 1.05. As you can see across the board, AMD is the riskiest one and Intel is the safest one. So if you want a lot of risk, you would go with AMD, and if you don't, Intel is the way to go. Now we're going to look at the growth rates for AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA. The first graph we're going to look at is dividends per share, which is one way companies give back to their shareholders, as well as price appreciation. As you can see, AMD has not and will not give out any dividends in the future. Next, we have Intel, which has went from a 10% dividend in the past 10 years to a 6% dividend in the past 5 years. And then they're expected to go down even more to 5.5% dividends per share in the future. Meanwhile, NVIDIA has not given out any dividends for the past 5 or 10 years, but they're expected to give out a 6.5% dividend in the future. Next, we have earnings per share. AMD for the past 5 and 10 years has ran a deficit, so they didn't have any earnings per share, but they're expected to go up to 31% in the future. Next, we have Intel, which has been a little bit rocky with a 9.5% in the past 10 years, a 5.5% in the past 5 years, but they're expected to go back up to 12.5% earnings per share. And then finally we have NVIDIA, which also has been rocky, going from 12.5% in the past 10 years to 27.5% in the past 5 years, and then back down to 11.5% in the future. Finally, we have book value per share. AMD has had a negative book value per share in the past 10 and 5 years at -17 and -9 respectively, and then in the future their book values per share is supposed to go up to 37%. Intel has steadily been declining. They stayed the same for the past 5 and 10 years at 8%, and then in the future they're supposed to go down to 7%. And then NVIDIA has went down a bit, but then they're expected to shoot back up with a 10.5% in the past 10 years and a 9% in the past 5 years, and then going up to 27% in the future. My final decision is don't buy AMD. If you are going into stocks for the long term, you do not want AMD on your portfolio. It is just way too risky. The beta as a 1.63 compared to a market beta of 1, their PE ratio being in the 80s, and their bonds being a B+, it is just way too risky. And if you want a safer stock, I would go for Intel in the long run. But if you want to day trade, AMD is your best bet. Thank you guys for tuning in to my company analysis on AMD. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.